Hello everyone and welcome to lecture 6.2, and in this lecture we're going to take a look at the powers our Congress has in terms of investigating and overlooking not only the federal government but people and organizations outside of the government as well. So let's take a look. So the investigative process that presides with our Congress is done through two committees. If you guys remember where we talked about the types of committees, it's in the standing committees, which are the permanent ones, or select committees, which are the committees that deal with specific issues. Now, it's important to note that investigations by Congress, they're not trials. They're not like a regular court trial. They're just an investigation to find out more information. Okay, now typically how this is done is staff members, not representatives or senators, would be the ones that would actually go and collect the evidence and schedule witnesses and go through that. Now, most investigations that take place, we never hear about. They aren't as high profile, or we're not focused in on them unless they deal with something specifically we follow or we're a part of in terms of our business or something that we enjoy, such as we'll see here in a minute, the investigations that Congress had over steroids in baseball or what have you. Now, the consequences that happen out of a lot of these investigations is generally there's a lot of new legislation to help make sure things don't happen again or help make sure things do, depending on what the investigation gleans. And it could mean changes in certain programs. It also could mean removal of officials or the appointment of officials, depending on what happens. Now, there are certain powers and rights Congress has. First, they have the power to subpoena witnesses. It's basically all it is an order to appear in court. And if you show up, more than likely they're going to tell you have to be under oath. Even though it's not a traditional trial, you can still perjure yourself. Now, I apologize for the May there. A student put that in there. That's my last name if you guys don't remember. But anyways, they can prosecute witnesses in two ways. One is perjury. Again, that's lying under oath, which is something that, if you don't know who this man is here, it's Roger Clemens, former Major League Baseball pitcher. He lied under oath in the Mitchell Report investigation on steroids in baseball, and he committed perjury. And then there's also contempt, which is willful obstruction of the investigation, whether outside of the actual room that they're doing the inquiry, or inside the room. If you guys have ever seen the movie Liar Liar, even though this is for a courtroom, where he gets thrown out, Jim Carrey's character gets thrown out and held in contempt because he's being combative with the judge as well as the lawyers and so forth. That'd be an example. And then witnesses. When you have a witness that is put forth under investigation, whether it's in Congress or within a regular court, constitutional rights have to be respected. And the biggest example here is the Fifth Amendment. You can't be forcibly used to testify against yourself. Excuse me, sorry, I kind of said that really weird. They can't force you to testify against yourself. So you can plead the Fifth Amendment. And in some cases, Congress will actually even grant immunity to help with investigations so that they can move things along and get who they actually want to get. And this is generally going to be used in cases where they're trying to investigate somebody or some group that's doing something wrong. Now, legislative oversight. This is the ability of Congress to review our executive branch's execution of congressional laws. So basically what that means is when Congress makes laws, the executive branch, they're there to carry them out. And Congress has the ability to say, okay, are you doing this correctly? In practice, this is just an example of checks and balances. It's just there saying, hey, look, we did this. Are you doing this? Are you carrying out what you're supposed to be doing? Because the executive, whether it's Trump or Obama or somebody else, they can interpret something completely different than what Congress may have wanted it to be. And then that might change with a different president, and then it completely change. So it just depends. Now, there are some limits on this oversight. It can be very inconsistent. typically because there's not enough time to do this oversight completely all the time, whether there might not be enough staff and funding to actually go through it because they're dealing with so many other different things within their powers to make sure the government's running on their end. And then there's also a lot of times there's not just enough money to keep track of it because you've got to use it for other things. That doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. Also, you got to remember specifically more with House of Representative members, they're up for re-election every 2 years, so they're not really looking for something where they're not going to gain too many votes because they want to stay in office. And then the laws, which are vague and open to interpretation, can kind of mean that, okay, they're not technically doing anything wrong, it just is their own interpretation, which is good and bad, depending on what it is and what's going on. Okay, now other limits that Congress has on executive actions is one, they're required, or they can require executive agencies to submit reports. So they can say, look, you're an executive agency, please submit this report. That's part of legislative oversight. Excuse me. They can ask supporting agencies, which we talked about in a previous lecture, such as the Government Accounting Office, and so forth, to actually go and look at it and say, okay, what's the executive branch doing here? Are their actions up to board, or are they on par with what they need to do? Specifically in this case, with the Government Accounting Office, are they spending the money correctly? Is it going where it needs to go? And that kind of connects with number 3, is Congress has the power to appropriate money because they deal with commerce, they deal with economic powers, so they can say, look, this is where money's going to go, and that puts some checks on not only the the executive branch, but all of the parts of government as well, even not at the federal level. And then they have the legislative veto, which we've previously talked about, where Congress can actually cancel executive actions. Okay? Or they could, depending on what's going on. Now, there's been debate on this where it's been ruled unconstitutional, and it violates as a violation of separation of powers. All right. Now that's it for section 2. We're going to stop here and split these up just to make it easier for you guys to watch or go through sections 2 and 3. So I'll see you guys in just a few minutes.